the next Bill Gates will not build an operating system, or that the next Mark Zuckerberg is absolutely not going to create another social network. Well, that's the wild idea right at the heart of Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. He says that real, meaningful progress isn't about just copying what we know works. It's about creating something the world has never, ever seen before. It's about going from 0 to 1. This is Peter Thiel's favorite one to ask in an interview, and you can see why. It's designed to just stop you in your tracks. He's not looking for some edgy, unpopular opinion. No, he's trying to see if you can think for yourself from the ground up. See, a really good answer to this question gives us a little peek into the future because it challenges something everyone else just accepts as true. And as Thiel says, brilliant thinking is rare, sure, but the courage to actually say it out loud, that's even rarer. And that question leads us directly into his core idea. He says there are really only two ways that we can make progress. We either make more of what we already have, or we create something completely new. And that difference, well, it changes everything. Okay, so Thiel breaks it down like this. Horizontal progress is basically just copying. Imagine you've got one typewriter and you figure out how to build 100 more. That's progress, sure, but it's extensive. Vertical progress, on the other hand, is intensive. That's technology. It's taking that same typewriter and inventing the very first word processor. One is just more of the familiar. The other literally changes the world. And then he gives these two paths some really powerful names. Horizontal progress, or going from 1 to N, he calls globalization. That's just taking something that works in one place and scaling it up everywhere. China's the perfect example, right? They've spent decades copying and implementing technologies that were already proven. But vertical progress, going from 0 to 1, that's what he calls technology. It's creating a fundamentally new, better way of doing something. And this is where we get Thiel's own answer to his big question. His contrarian truth is that while most of us are obsessed with globalization, our actual future depends entirely on technology. Why? Well, because just copying our current way of life and spreading it everywhere is completely unsustainable. Just imagine if every developing nation started consuming resources like the West does, but without any new, cleaner tech. The environmental result would be, well, catastrophic. In Thiel's mind, without new technology, globalization is a one-way ticket to disaster. Okay, so if technology is so critical, why aren't we more obsessed with it? Thiel argues that the answer lies in one single incredibly traumatic event, the dot-com crash of 2000. That crash didn't just evaporate fortunes. He says it taught an entire generation of entrepreneurs a set of lessons that were dangerously, fundamentally wrong. Man, that boom, it was such a short, intense gold rush. Between late 98 and early 2000, the NASDAQ just went vertical. But the crash was just as fast and just as brutal. After peaking over 5,000, it lost nearly 80% of its value. For a lot of people, this wasn't just a market correction. It felt like a final judgment on the entire idea of technological optimism. So from the ashes of that crash, a new set of rules emerged. First, don't you dare have a grand vision. Just make small, incremental improvements. Second, stay lean and flexible, which Thiel argues just became code for having no plan at all. Third, don't try to create a whole new market. Just find a competitor and do what they do, but slightly better. And finally, the big one, focus only on your product, because a great product should just magically sell itself, right? But Thiel says, no way. Silicon Valley learned the exact wrong lessons. And his counterprinciples are basically a call to arms. Risk being bold, not trivial. Have a plan, any plan, because a bad plan is way better than no plan. And this is crucial. Avoid competition at all costs. He says you can't just be a contrarian by disagreeing with the crowd. You have to think for yourself and actually build something new. And that brings us to probably the most controversial claim in the whole book, that capitalism and competition are actually opposites. In Peter Thiel's world, the goal is not to beat your competition, it's to make your competition totally irrelevant by building a monopoly. And his central point here is that creating value is not enough. You also have to be able to capture some of that value. I mean, just look at this data from 2012. The entire US airline industry creates a massive amount of value, right? But because they're all locked in this brutal head-to-head competition, they capture almost none of it. Their profit margins are razor thin. And then you have Google. They also create huge value, but they capture a massive slice of it. The difference isn't quality, it's the market structure. One is a war zone, the other is a monopoly. Now, let's be super clear. When Phil says monopoly, he is not talking about some illegal bully that goes around squashing its rivals. He's talking about a creative monopoly, a company that is so good at what it does that nobody else can even offer a close substitute. Think Google with search. These are the kinds of businesses that create brand new categories of value for everybody. This whole situation leads to this fascinating little dance where pretty much every business lies about its market. The monopolists, because they're scared of getting regulated, do everything they can to make it look like they have tons of competition. And meanwhile, the companies that are just barely surviving in a competitive bloodbath, they invent tiny little niches to pretend that they're unique and dominant. So let's look at the monopolists' lie. What they do is they frame their market in the biggest, broadest terms possible. So is Google a monopoly? Well, in search, yeah, they absolutely dominate. But if you call them an advertising company, all of a sudden they're just one small player in a massive global market. And if you call them a tech company, wow, their slice of the pie gets microscopic. It's a really clever way to hide in plain sight. And listen, this isn't just some theory. This happens in the real world. Here's Google's chairman at the time, Eric Schmidt, literally telling Congress that they face an extremely competitive landscape. He's not really talking to the politicians there. He's performing the monopolist's lie for the whole world to see, framing their market perfectly to seem huge and competitive. Now, on the flip side, you've got the competitor's lie. They do the exact opposite. They define their market as this tiny intersection of niches to make themselves sound unique. So you're not just opening a restaurant, no. You're opening the only British food restaurant in Palo Alto. You claim you dominate this super tiny market, but what you're really ignoring is that you're competing with every single other restaurant in town. Phil says this is a fatal mistake for new businesses. So if competition is this trap that just leads to tiny profits and ruthless copycat behavior, how do the great companies actually succeed? Well, they're different. They find a way to get out of the fight for survival altogether. You know, in economics class, they teach us that the ideal state is perfect competition, this perfect equilibrium. But Thiel has a much simpler word for that: death. Because in business, equilibrium means you're not special. It means your profits are basically zero, and you're just fighting for scraps to stay alive. Real, lasting success is found as far away from that equilibrium as possible. A monopoly isn't a failure of the market. It's the sign of a successful business. And it all comes together in this brilliant twist on Tolstoy's famous line. In business, Phil says, all happy companies are different. Each one is unique because it solved a truly unique problem and earned itself a monopoly. But the failed companies, they're all the same. They just couldn't escape that brutal, soul-crushing war of competition. So the question that 0 to 1 really leaves us with is, what unique problem are you going to solve?